Net neutrality is the basic principle that internet service providers should treat all data on the internet the same, regardless of the content, the website, platform, application, type of attached equipment, or method of communication, and to not charge the user differently or to discriminate. If these principles are legally enforced, internet service providers are unable to intentionally block, slow down, throttle, or charge different prices online for different websites and/or specific content or services. The term was coined by Columbia University media law professor Tim Wu in his 2003 paper titled Network Neutrality: Broadband Discrimination, in describing the internet as an extension of the long-standing concept of a common carrier under Title II of the Communications Act of 1934, an act which was used to regulate the telephone systems of the time in an effort to break up AT&T's monopoly, their Bell system. Professor Wu recently spoke at the Personal Democracy Forum in June 2017, where he explains the motivations behind the different sides of the net neutrality debate.
On the one hand, you have this thing called the internet, invented in the 60s and 70s, non-commercial from its origins. It's changed a little, obviously, but imbued with this idea that there should be a universal network, one really that left the power to the ends of the network to do what they might with a connection between all people. In some ways, the first medium worthy of the name. So that's the internet, always somewhat fragile, never perfect, an experiment in free speech, an experiment in open innovation, an experiment in what happens when you let people communicate openly with each other. On the other side of this situation, you have the phone and cable industry and their broadband product, in which they have a very different set of concerns. From the cable's point of view, the best thing about broadband is it makes a ton of money. In fact, you might not know this, but it costs less than $5 maybe to provide broadband service per month. It's sold for about $60 to $80. It's the only company I know has such a good deal going is maybe Starbucks. I mean, it is the profit margin on broadband is at minimum 95 and sometimes 99%. So this is an incredibly lucrative product. But from the cable industry's perspective, it isn't making enough money as it is. It could make more money, and that's the problem with net neutrality. I should put that in a little more perspective. The problem for cable is that people don't like cable television anymore. They've noticed that they're paying for 300 channels and are watching maybe 1 or 2, and those are the premium channels. They prefer, especially young people, but also increasing numbers of older people, they prefer just to watch what they want to watch, which doesn't sound that crazy. And this is a massive impediment to the cable industry business model, which has been dependent on people reliably forking over, $100 to $150 a month forever. So, where do you go? I know, we can make more money on broadband. How do we make more money on broadband? Oh, look at that company Google. Look at that company Netflix. Look at even Wikipedia. Look at all these bloggers. They ain't paying us a cent. People are just communicating with them, working with them, and we're not making any money. Something is wrong. These are the kind of things, or these are the kind of motivations behind net neutrality. So I think it's important, the basic net neutrality rule, no blocking, no discrimination, treating all content the same. And I think, you can kind of inherently see by that it might be important, but let me just give you, 2 or 3 reasons why it's particularly important right now. At the core of net neutrality is actually a hidden free speech principle. It allows speakers, frankly innovators, a kind of an opportunity to reach the people that they wouldn't have if they had to cut a deal with cable to do it otherwise.
The FCC classified internet service providers as common carrier under Title II, effective June 12, 2015, for the purpose of enforcing net neutrality. A common carrier typically must demonstrate to the regulator that it is fit, willing, and able to provide those services for which it has been granted authority. Public airlines, railroads, bus lines, taxi companies, phone companies, internet service providers, cruise ships, freight carriers generally operate as common carriers. Former FCC Chair Tom Wheeler, with a majority of the FCC commissioners at the time, classified broadband under Title II of the Communications Act of 1934. The Act generally bars, with certain exceptions, including most rural areas, acquisitions by telephone companies of more than 10% interest in cable operators, and vice versa, and bars joint ventures between telephone companies and cable systems serving the same areas. Tom Wheeler describes the FCC's motivations for classifying broadband under Title II, also making the argument of free speech.
This proposal has been described by one opponent as, quote, a secret plan to regulate the internet.
The opponent Wheeler is referring to is Ajit Pai, the current FCC chair. At the time Wheeler said this, Pai was a commissioner, but in the minority on the FCC board.
Nonsense. This is no more a plan to regulate the internet than the First Amendment is a plan to regulate free speech. They both stand for the same concept: openness, expression, and an absence of gatekeepers telling people what they can do, where they can go, and what they can think. The action that we take today is about the protection of internet openness. Now let's make no mistake about it. Broadband access providers have the technical ability and the economic incentive to impose restrictions on the internet. Today's order is more powerful and more expansive. It provides a statutory 1-2 punch, if you will, that combines Title II of the Communications Act with the significant powers of Section 706 of the Telecommunications Act. This is the FCC using all the tools in our toolbox to protect innovators and consumers. To ban paid prioritization, the so-called fast lanes. They will not divide the internet into haves and have-nots. To ban blocking, consumers will get what they pay for. Unfettered access to any lawful content on the internet. And to ban throttling, because degrading access to legal content and services can have the same effect as blocking, and it will not be permitted to exist. Today, history is being made by a majority of this commission as we vote for a fast, fair, and open internet. And with that, I will call for the yeas and nays. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed?
No.
The ayes have it. The item is
Title II under the Communications Act of 1934 is over 100 pages of regulation. While Title II regulations do enforce the principle of treating different types of internet traffic with equal preference, it also introduces a range of other regulations and restrictions which do not fall exclusively into the category of net neutrality, including service and charges, liability of carriers for damages, recovery of damages, valuation of carrier property, extension of lines, annual reporting, privacy of customer information, communications assistance for law enforcement, interconnections between networks, universal service, infrastructure sharing, and more. Current FCC Chair Ajit Pai explains on PBS why he thinks FCC Title II is not appropriate for internet service providers.
One of the issues here is whether or not we treat broadband like a utility. And if it's treated like a utility, the requirement is that you, as the provider, are not allowed to put your finger on the scale and slow one person down or speed somebody else up. And I just want to pose a hypothetical to you.
Sure.
Let's just say Comcast created a new TV series, and it just so happened that that competed with a Netflix series very similarly. If these rules go away, how is there not an incredible incentive for Comcast to slow Netflix down coming into my house and make their video, the Comcast video, very robust?
So under that hypothetical, one of the things that's important to remember is that it is a hypothetical, that we don't see evidence of that happening in the marketplace on a widespread level.
There have been some examples of ISPs blocking certain things. The Google Wallet was blocked, Skype was blocked, one Canadian telecom blocked pro-labor sites. I mean, it's not like this doesn't happen.
A widely cited example of a violation of net neutrality principles was the internet service provider Comcast's secret slowing down or throttling of uploads from peer-to-peer file sharing networks by using forged packets. Comcast did not stop blocking these protocols, such as BitTorrent, until the FCC ordered them to stop.
There are isolated cases, but if you look at the FCC's own record, there are only scattered anecdotes to support this. And the argument I've made is that in order to justify preemptive regulation of all 4,462 internet service providers, you should have pretty concrete evidence of an overwhelming market failure. But secondly, the other argument I would make is that the hypothetical is a classic question of competition and consumer protection law.
So you would feel comfortable telling consumers, you can trust the Comcasts, the AT&Ts, the Verizons to not do that, to not put their finger on the scale and promote their stuff at the expense of someone else's?
Not at all. I would say as a government regulator that we don't put faith in any single particular sector of the economy or particular company. We put our faith in the rule of law. And the rule of law, which includes antitrust law and consumer protection law, is faithfully administered by the federal government agencies and state agencies that are charged with executing that law.
Back when the FCC was first talking about changing these rules a few years ago, there was something like 4 million comments posted, and the overwhelming majority of those were people saying, we want net neutrality. We want to know that these protections are in place. Does that evidence not sway you that maybe these rules should not be dismantled?
Well, I certainly understand that there's a wide variety of public interest in this particular issue, but when I meet with consumers, and I've met with folks from Kalamazoo, Michigan, down to Carthage, Mississippi, from Barrow, Alaska, to Diller, Nebraska, what they tell me is that their concern is not that their internet service provider is blocking lawful traffic or doing something like that. It's that they want more competition. They want better, faster, and cheaper internet.
All right, FCC Commissioner Ajit Pai, thank you very much for being here.
It's great to be with you.
While the current FCC Chair Ajit Pai is correct that Americans want to see more competition and choice when it comes to their internet service provider, and while his views on not enforcing net neutrality might be reasonable in a system with many choices of internet service provider, in the United States, most individuals have only one choice of internet service provider. This means individuals are not able to change to another provider if the provider they are forced to use acts in an irresponsible way or decides to arbitrarily block or slow down content. This does not mean, however, that classifying internet service providers under Title II of the Communications Act of 1934 is the correct course of action, as it introduces a wide range of other rules which are not related to net neutrality specifically. However, having sensible rules to prevent ISPs from restricting content to users in the long run is a good idea. Using another example, in July 2017, Verizon Wireless was accused of throttling after users noticed that videos playing on Netflix and YouTube were slower than usual, though Verizon commented that it was conducting network testing and that net neutrality rules permit reasonable network management practices. In an interesting twist to the net neutrality debate, T-Mobile CEO John LeGrier interestingly violates net neutrality, not by taking away or blocking currently available services or content, but by speeding up services or not charging customers of preferred partners, such as Netflix and Amazon. John LeGrier explains his thoughts on the net neutrality discussion and his company's policy from 2016 known as Binge On.
There's been a lot of talk about our Binge On video service, and I'm concerned frankly, confused on why this is an issue. There are groups out there confusing consumers, so there's no way I could stay quiet on this one. When we launched Binge On, we gave our customers a new option to get way more video from their data plans and some free video from popular sites. We launched with 24 partners like Netflix and Hulu, and just today we announced 14 more, including A&E and Sony PlayStation, and more than 50 additional service providers are asking to be included. So why are special interest groups and even Google offended by this? Why are they trying to characterize this as a bad thing? I think they may be using net neutrality as a platform to get into the news. As a company that's a huge fan of a free and open internet, I find that disappointing. At T-Mobile, we're giving you more video, more for free, and a powerful new choice on how you want your video delivered. What's not to love? We give customers more choices, and these jerks are complaining. Who the hell do they think they are? What gives them the right to dictate what my customers or any wireless consumer can choose for themselves? By the way, what do you think Dumb and Dumber would have done if they'd been first to market with this technology? They would have found a way to charge you for it, not us. We give it to customers just because you pick T-Mobile. That is the Un-carrier way. So listen, I really don't know the big guy's agenda or who they're advocating for, but I know it isn't really for customers. All I know is who I'm fighting for, and that's you and America's wireless consumers.
Whether you believe that John LeGrier is really serving you or not, the fact remains that most Americans are limited to one or at most two internet service providers. If T-Mobile decides to offer extra or to offer less or to block certain services, most Americans have little choice in the matter, either way, to influence the result.
We are here with Michael Beckerman, the head of Internet Association, who has members as diverse as Amazon.com and Google. And we are here to talk about some of the present issues that we're seeing on the Hill and throughout Washington. Let's start out with the never-ending battle of net neutrality.
The Internet Association is a political lobbying organization based in Washington, D.C., and is formed by members of the internet industry, including Amazon, eBay, Facebook, Google, Airbnb, AOL, Auction.com, Expedia, LinkedIn, Lyft, Monster, Rackspace, Reddit, Salesforce, SurveyMonkey, TripAdvisor, Twitter, Uber, Yahoo, Yelp, Zynga. What's the common connection between these industries that are members of the Internet Association? Mostly all of the member companies rose to power under the general principles of net neutrality, and these companies would prefer to not have to pay extra to internet service providers to provide their services. It's a calculated business decision, not out of some empathy or care for the public's interest.
So we're seeing a new spoke in the wheel this time. This year, we're with the FCC making its first steps to roll back some of the Obama-era administration's rules on net neutrality. So how crucial is it for Congress to step in, and at what point? Because this could be a long, drawn-out battle again, with court cases possible and regulation. How crucial is it to legislate here?
Yeah, well, you're right. It is the never-ending issue. I mean, this goes back, as far as 2005, when there were net neutrality principles at the FCC, and then there were fines levied against Comcast for doing things that were in violation of those principles. And then you had the 2010 rules, which were struck down because Verizon sued. And now we have the 2015 rules, and so this has gone back and forth. I anticipate probably it'll end up back in the courts again if the FCC rolls it back, but this is a critically important issue for the internet. And frankly, because we've had these rules, and at least the overhang of the rules since 2005, I do believe that this is why you've had this great innovation that you've seen online, because the barrier of entry is so very, very low. Imagine if back in 2005 or even 2010, if ISPs were able to play gatekeeper or charge entry, you wouldn't have all these new companies that are coming up and creating jobs and growing our economy. And so that's why we're fighting to keep these rules.
What the American public is seeing at this time is a lack of leadership from Congress over the years to enact common sense and simple rules to enforce net neutrality, while not burdening current internet service providers with extra, unrelated rules. The public is also seeing a lack of investment in new internet service providers, which prevents choice and competition to potentially abusive tactics of the current main internet service providers. This means the burden of regulating or protecting the internet falls to more temporary measures of enforcement, such as FCC board recommendations or decisions from lobbying organizations such as the Internet Association. What does the future hold for net neutrality? Only time will tell.